Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. We'll get started in just a minute.
Yeah, and
let me give you people get acclimated, get joined in, and please go ahead and mute yourself if you're not already muted.
Right to pay a bill. Okay, let's see here. Everything's going good so far here.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar called Designing Strategy for Sustainability, focused on yourself, staff, leadership, volunteers, and organization with Dr. Steve Swafford and Dr. Jill McCrory. Dr. Steve Swafford, IOM, is the balance warrior and CEO of Leadership Outfitters. He's worked for more than 30 years for and with nonprofit and education-focused organizations in the areas of strategy, leadership development, communication, membership, and executive management. He brings a lot of practical knowledge and strategy and leadership and executive leadership experience with past organizations such as the National Association of Home Builders and the American Subcontractors Association. Dr. Jill McCrory, ringleader and co-founder of Leadership Outfitters, has been actively involved in nonprofit management for nearly 33 years, serving in a variety of capacities. As a co-founder of Leadership Outfitters, Jill has actively guided the leadership training and development programs for more than 1,000 organizations. We're so happy to have them here with us today, and we're grateful for their time. This is the 5th webinar in our winter series. You can find a full schedule of upcoming webinars on our website on the webinars page found under the curriculum tab. Steve and Jill will be referencing a strategy document that can be found on our website following this presentation. Please go ahead and mute yourself if you're not already muted. You can also ask a question using the raise hand button located at the top of the screen next to the chat button. If you have raised your hand, the symbol will appear white and be underlined in purple. The host will call on you and ask you to unmute yourself to speak with the presenter. And to lower your hand, just click the button again. Again, thank you for joining us. We're looking forward to a great presentation. Now I'm going to turn it over to Steve.
Andrew, thanks so much, and welcome everybody to the 5th program in the series. Jill and I are going to be causing some trouble with y'all, and I do recognize some names that's joined us here today from previous institutes. Both Jill and I teach at a couple of different sites, and we're excited about the program today that we've taken a look at from a strength-based, and even going back to Libby's presentation earlier of looking at strength finders. We'll be looking at complementing a couple of the other programs that have been already provided and build upon that, looking at self and organization both on this. Jill, you want to say a couple of words before we jump right on in?
It's a great being here, and we hope that you enjoy this today. And as Andrew said, after this meeting, we are going to put up a strategy document, sort of a guide that you can take a look at, and I hope you enjoy that as well.
Okay. Well, let's just jump right on in. We're going to take a look at a question to put into the chat box so we can see some of the thoughts. And this is something when we're looking at strengths, when we're looking at what do we do well. And we'd like to start out from an organizational standpoint of what is the greatest strength for your chamber or association. So when you're thinking of strengths, what is that greatest strength? You know, popular one when we look at chambers and associations is around networking, professional development. It could be around marketing, it could be around economic development in your community. But if you would put down into the chat box, oh, storytelling, love that. Yeah. Mission, mindedness, nice. Staying focused on that. Good. Other thoughts. Yeah, huge. Advocacy is a big piece, and staff. Yeah, even this week I've been seeing more and more feeds about chambers adding additional staff coming on now with that hope. Oh yeah, relationships and communication, staff, advocacy. Yeah, advocacy is a huge one on the association and onto the chamber side. Aggregating audiences, looking at those community stakeholders, pulling those folks together. Those are all key ones when we're looking at those strengths. And we're looking organizationally as just this first dialogue. And as Jill mentioned about a document we're going to provide for you, it's a free resource we're going to provide for you afterwards. It's a self-guided strategy document that you can use both with your staff, with your organization, or for you individually. So this gives us a good idea of some of those thoughts out there. Okay.
So hold on to these thoughts, because we're going to use this question a little bit later when we talk about your organization and what this might mean to look at your strength and what the opportunities might be from that, what that might tell you about your organization.
So as we go to the next area, we're going to look at where those 4 areas are where we focus on strengths.
So what we want to do is that so often when we look at strength-based organizations, we tend to stick on the organization, which that's a big conversation to have about your organization. But today we wanted to open that up and actually look at these 4 areas: the strengths that you yourself have, the strengths of your leadership of your organization, the strength of staff, if you have staff, and volunteers, as we all have volunteers, and then finally the strength of your organization. So, you know, think about this as a pyramid. You know, you've got yourself that you've got to look at first. And if you take a look at our next slide, you'll see that we equate this with the oxygen mask. Obviously, all of us used to travel. I don't know how many of you are traveling now, but I have dim memories of being on planes, and they always tell you, put your own mask on before you try to help someone else. And so that's the philosophy here, is that we have to start with ourselves. And it's not just, you know, I know everybody this year has been through so many probably webinars or conversations about how are we taking care of ourselves. This is more than just self-care. This is paying attention to yourself, your strengths, recognizing what am I good at, what am I excellent at, and what your priorities and goals are for yourself. What are the expectations you have of yourself and others have of you? And then what's that balance? And obviously the balance is that question we've talked a lot about this year as we navigated COVID. So if everybody could just mute themselves, that would be great as you come on in and join us. Find that mute button. And so we start with and taking care of ourselves first. And part of this is the next slide. If you'll show the next slide, that'd be great. Whoops, not the next slide. So if you'll go back to the one before, maybe I took something off the slide, but I didn't. So again, looking at those shared expectations that you have and that balance that you have. So we do want to ask another question. Steve?
Yeah, as we go into the next slide, it does start with self-care. And on that opening question where I asked y'all about what are some of the strengths for your chamber or for your association, and staff came up a few times, and where that comes back into play of how you take care of yourself and how do you take care of those around you, build back that capacity to look strategically for your chamber or for your association. I was chatting with Isabel and Andrew before we started today, and I asked them this question. I said, hey, what have you done this last week to take care of yourself? What have you done to celebrate, to exhale, or to do something fun? And they both had shared a couple of things of what they've done in the last week, is to remind, we're in such a fast pace now with new openings and new ways in how we're connecting into our communities and wanting to gather together. And we need to remember to take care of ourselves. And if you guys would put something into the chat box of one thing you've done this last week, whether it's added an extra day to your workout, you've added more hydration to what's going on into your life, went on a hike, that just caused me to exhale. Love that part. That's a really, really good part. For our bike ride, to get some fresh air, we were able to enjoy the outside and to get a little bit exercise, to walk in the woods, that time to reflect. There's a lot that's happening. Water consumption is a big one. Took a walk in the woods, exercise. Read a book outside, reading a book because you want to read a book. Gosh, these are great ones. I love this. I saw something about the happiness. Oh yeah, started a new podcast, a happiness lab. Really intrigued with that. What a great concept, even framing that as a happiness lab. I spent Saturday entirely outside. Took a dog to oh my God. This put a lot of happiness into into my space right now, reading these. I helped someone. Wow. Yeah. Helping someone in need and paying that forward. Powerful. Gosh, thank you all for sharing that. Because when we take care of ourselves, then we can take care of those around us, whether it's personal or professional. And then that builds capacity within the organization from that sustainability model. How do we continue to recharge ourselves so we can then recharge others? Where we're going to guide now is to set up what that SOAR framework is and looking at that strength-based mindset. As Libby had shared a few months ago of looking at strength finders, this is another way to build upon what are those strengths that we do have. This is both individually, as Jill mentioned earlier, but organizationally, these steps will apply. So these apply both personally, professionally, individually, organizationally. And Jill's going to guide us through a little bit of the SOAR framework that, like most of y'all, you probably were very familiar with the SWOT analysis in organizations, and you still may do a little bit. We came across the SOAR framework about 10 years ago. And Jill takes away on the SOAR framework.
Yeah, so this is why we started with that question of what's your organization's greatest strength, and why we're talking about looking at your own strengths. The SOAR framework is a strength-based process. And as I'm talking about this, if you have gone through the SOAR framework, we'd love to see that in the chat box. I know some of folks that we have worked with are in the room. We'd love to see if you've done that with us or with someone else. We're not the only ones that do it. But it all starts with this strengths of, comes from an appreciative inquiry background about what is it that you do well? What is it you're best at? What are you excellent at? And instead of talking about strengths and getting excited about strengths and then taking you down into a negative spiral of, okay, now what's our weaknesses? The SOAR framework is not a deficit-based process. It is a positivity-based process. And I see Nicole is on here, that she's done the SOAR framework with Steve, and that's great. You go from strengths to looking at opportunities rather than going to weaknesses. You go to, what are opportunities? What are the opportunities are there? They might not have been in your control. You might not have thought about them. And so often when I do the SOAR framework, I love to look at how the strengths inform the opportunities. I worked with an organization that rather than just try to problem solve the issues within their faltering organization, they said, what is it that we do really well? And could we accentuate that and build something from that? And that's what they did. And it then in turn took care of those issues that were evident. And from opportunities, we'll go to aspirations. What are those things you aspire to? And as a group, when you're looking at this, or even as personally when you look at this, it's like, what are your goals? What is it you want to accomplish? And then from that, you got to have results. You've got to have measurables. And I know you all are professionals. You've heard of SMART goals or smarter goals, but this is where you put legs on the results. What are those measurable results? How many and how much and how often and who and what will it look like when we're done? And when you use this framework, In psychology terms, it's you keep an upward spiral in the process rather than dragging people into a negative spiral. And when you bring people into an upward spiral, the energy stays in the room and people are more creative and excited about the process. Obviously, you can tell I'm a fan of this for using for yourself and for your leadership, for your staff, for your internal organization and the external organization. Steve, you're the one that wrote the doctoral thesis on here, so you got something to add? You're very gracious in letting me explain it in all of my passion.
You explained it a lot better, and I know there's some folks on the call. I know Nicole, like you jumped on in about doing this a while back, and organizationally, it really does change the dialogue. We were with the chamber this last week, and it was just a different approach in their retrospect, and because they had traditionally done the SWOT analysis. And when we had a reflection a little bit later, it's like, wow, we really did take a look at this in a very different way from a possibility standpoint. It doesn't mean that there's not threats, which we're going to address a little bit later, or those challenges that do come up individually and organizationally, but looks at what are our possibilities. It's very, very forward thinking, which guides us into our next one about soaring to leadership. I'm not a big fan of kind of cute acronyms, like SOAR, but it really is a solid process that we have found now for over a decade. And it asks these 4 questions, as Jill noted. Jill, do you want to take these forward, or do you want me to take them?
No, I'll take them. And the reason why is because very often when we ask the question of what is the greatest strength of your organization, when we do pre-planning surveys, very often we'll hear the board or the volunteers or the leadership. And it's an important thing to recognize is the strength of your leaders. And so even if you have leaders that still need to grow and develop their leadership skills, there's still something that they're really good at. And when we take a look at that board of directors or those committee chairs or the leaders in our organization saying, what are they good at? And are we putting them in those places that they should be used? And if we have this group of leaders that are particularly good at this thing, are we using them? And what are those opportunities that present themselves in recognizing those leadership capabilities and strengths? And again, you just walk through, as we said, the SOAR framework and looking at aspirations, not only your aspirations for your leaders, but what are their aspirations? What is it they want to achieve? And then together building measurable results. And so it's, I guess, a big point today is that strength-based thinking is more than just a planning session talking about the organization, but it really dives deeply into and saturates your entire organization, including volunteers, staff, and leadership.
And even looking at these 4 questions before we go into the next area of building and asking where you believe some of your strengths are. Even these 4 questions on this slide, and this will be available right after to our session, is to even ask these 4 questions within a committee or task force or within a board of even taking, if there's one element that you wanted to synthesize and integrate immediately, you could take one question and ask it at each, or take these 4 questions and ask a different question each month or for each meeting, or have all 4 of these, put folks into a breakout if you're still meeting by Zoom or by Teams, or if you're starting a hybrid, is to ask your organization, ask your chamber or association these 4 questions. And I'm going to guide you over into the strategic leadership element. So we want to give a little bit of background where that SOAR framework came from and that SOAR mindset of looking at what are our greatest strengths. And where we have found in organizations is that individuals tend to have a strength or a bias. And I'm going to ask you all to self-select what you believe is your greatest strength, looking within your chamber or your association. So are you more on the strategic thinking side as far as a strength that you bring to the organization or individually within your teams? Or are you more about strategic acting, the following through, creating the conditions? Or is it around the influencing? So do you think it's more of that that strategic thinking, that blue sky, that high level? Is it strategic acting, the implementation, getting sure that there's implementation? Or is it on the influencing side? So if you put that in the chat box, which of those three? So we have the thinking coming on up here. Wow, we have a trifecta now. 3 for 3. Yeah, lots of thinking going on. Of looking through the strategic thinking. This is going to be, so my strategic thinking folks, we have a couple acting popping up on there, influencing, that this overall, and this is a question too that would be great to ask for your board, is ask for them to self-select and see how this populates. So if you've got a board or a committee that believes that they're all on the influencing side, now that would be really strong, probably in the advocacy arena, because that's around where that's where that influencing element comes into play. We see influencing coming up too, the thinking. Thinking is a big piece. And so today, the session today is looking at that high level, that strategic thinking, which is guiding us into, we wanted to bring in a fun visual for you into the next area. And that's really what we're looking at, is the thinking, the acting, and the influencing. Knowing that those three, now on a daily basis, we have to go through all three. We don't have a choice. However, we have a strength, which is natural for us. It doesn't mean that we can't do the other areas, but we have one of these three areas typically that just naturally, that is easier, that requires less energy to go into. So that's why I wanted to ask this. And this is another tool that would be very easy to use within your committees and with your board to start a dialogue of looking at that strategic area of thinking. Is it around thinking? Is it around that strategy area? Is it around the acting for the implementation? Or is it the influencing, which comes up so many times? Now we're going to shift over into looking at staff and volunteers. We're looking individually and looking at the broad areas of the thinking, the acting, and influencing. And there's certain ways in how these then populate. And we're going to bring in a couple of other resources too, from even all the way back from Jim Collins and Good to Great and Built to Last. So Jill, you want to take us on staff and volunteers?
Yeah, so I'd love to start out on this. So again, it's what is their SOAR? What are their strengths, opportunity, aspirations, and results? Again, looking through that lens with staff, if you have staff, volunteers, obviously. And as Steve said, when we asked if your strength was in strategic thinking, in strategic influencing, strategic acting, I would imagine that some of the strength finders, Clifton Strength Finders assets that you would find would be that these would be very close. That if you're a strategic influencer, that WOO, W-O-O, which is one of the Clifton strengths, would show up on your profile, if not the first 5, close in those first 5 to 10 strengths. We look at self-identification of encouraging our volunteers to look at their strengths and the bright spots. Steve, do you wanna just touch on the Heath brothers and bright spots, and that if somebody hasn't seen that clip, describe what Heath says about that?
I would love to. So if y'all want to Google or Bing Heath Brothers Bright Spots, and the other one is Leading with Emotion. So the Heath Brothers have a series of books, and one is Switch, one is Made to Stick. Traditionally on the business side of looking at what makes your organization sticky, what makes you stand out, and then Switch was around when times are change or in situations of change. It's tough to change and move forward. Those two videos both are under 5 minutes. They focus on when we want to change, that we tend to want to look at facts only. That we tend to want to change, though, typically if we're motivated by emotion or a passion or a reason or a feeling. That's where real change ends up occurring. Looking at the strength finders, going back to Libby's presentation on the strength-based leadership, it complements those two together. Let's look at the bright spots. What does an organization do? And then it says, you're really good at, say, advocacy. And then it's breaking down the advocacy piece of what characteristics in your advocacy program make you effective? Why is it a strength? And we say, okay, we do this, this, and this well. Okay, then how do we replicate that into other areas for the chamber or the association? In that same way, how can we take those bright spots, those characteristics of why it's so strong, and replicate that into other areas? So that team assessment is such a strong way to start on out, looking at the board, the committee, or even the staff. Guiding us into that last part about the right seats, that's when we're looking at strengths. Do we have the right people in the right places? That it does become a strength, that it is a place that they're going to be more effective. So they may not be as effective in one place, but hey, could they be more effective for here? This applies to volunteers as well as staff, and even from organization. I know and this comes from Collins's work way back of looking at good to great and also in built to last. And he uses the analogy of getting the right people on the bus. We've heard that many times, getting the right people in the seats. Some of us may even use that phrase and not even know where it came from. We like to use the expanded concept of a subway or a metro, because there's some volunteers that you want to have them on just for one stop. For whatever reason it may be, maybe it's personality, maybe it's capacity, maybe it's time, but there are some people or volunteers that you want to have on for the entire train, that you want to have them from start to finish. And that's where the right seats, or we like to use also the metro or the train metaphor of one stop versus all of the stops. And there could be a number of different reasons, and finding out, making people successful in what they're doing, so they feel good that they show up, and also they feel that they've accomplished something, that there's a start and a finish to those tasks. Jill, is there anything else onto the right seats before we go into leveraging strengths?
No, but I think we have a question that we're going to open up and let people unmute themselves for.
Okay.
So we want to look at how have you leveraged the strengths of your staff or volunteers? We'd love some examples. We'd give the opportunity for you could certainly put it in the chat, but we'd love to open up the opportunity for you to share with us. If you want to raise your hand, and we'll call on you. Andrew will tell us who's raising their hand, and we'll ask you to unmute yourself and share. I know some of the names I see in the chat box are not shy people. But how have you recognized strengths and maximized those strengths of either volunteers or staff or even your leadership? We'd love to hear from you.
I see a raised hand from Nicole.
Nicole, take it away.
Hi. So, this last year was challenging for everybody. We had to initially, when the pandemic first shut everything down, we furloughed 15 out of 20 staff people. So we were down to 5. And so the way that was done was by looking at everyone on staff and seeing, okay, what strengths did everyone have that they could bring to the table, where they were able to cover the full range of what we would do to keep the business running, but with only a quarter of our staff. And so, one person we knew, she was focused more on travel trade, but she just happened to love graphic design. And so she became our in-house graphic designer. I was our director of visitor and partner services, but I also came from a background of running offices. So I became our new operations person. And we kind of did that with everybody. So everyone took on more multiple hats than they had before. But out of that, we've built a very strong team where we've always had this mindset that we don't have silos in our office. And even if we have departments, everyone still works together. And that's even more solidified now. That kind of is our silver lining out of the last year.
That's great.
Nicole, it's an amazing example. And two, Nicole, could you say the organization that you're part of too? So just let us know where you are.
I'm with Visit Huntington Beach. So we are a travel organization. We are technically an association, but we're non-member based. And because the travel industry has been hit so hard in the last year, that was the reason why we had to do such significant cuts.
Wow, it's a great example, Nicole, of using that in a situation which has not been ideal this year, but really looking at, okay, what skills do we have? What's the capacity that we do have? And can I do a follow-up question with you, Nicole?
Sure.
What's that capacity look like moving forward, do you think? I mean, it's unknown, but I see lots of hope here in the next, say, 3 months, even now. Are you guys looking to re-engage more staff?
Not yet. We did expand.
If you guys could place on mute, that'd be great, except for Nicole. Thank you.
So we are not expanding just yet. We did go from 5 to 9. So we brought back 4 of the additional people that were furloughed. Unfortunately, we had to lay off everybody else. And so we're looking at probably next year, maybe bringing on 1 or 2 more people, but it'll likely be at least 3 or 4 years before we're back to where we were in 2019.
Gotcha.
Well,
thanks, Nicole. And that is consistent with, well, I've seen some other feeds. I saw another chamber just down the road from where I am right now, who's bringing on another staff person now with the hopes of more engagement. So Nicole, great. Thanks for jumping on in to lead us in that dialogue. Are there anybody else that has a similar example that Nicole may have triggered or brought up another example that you guys wanted to share within your chamber or association? Any other examples?
We know you're maximizing your folks' talents and strengths. Love to have an example of how you're doing that.
Any others? Okay. As we're looking at, it is about leveraging our strengths, and that's about finding the bright spots, as we were chatting a little bit earlier. And we've been looking individually and a little bit organizationally, and we're looking more specific even organizationally. And this is what the bonus handout, not our presentation today, but we're also going to post a self-guided strategic thinking guide for you after the session today. And so what we're going to find into the next section when we're looking at a bullseye here organizationally is understanding these 3 areas of vision and mission. And we've seen a shift in the last 5 years to what's called a purpose statement, which was built a lot around the work of Simon Sinek's concept of why, the golden circle concept. And organizations going into purpose statements rather than doing traditional vision and mission. Purpose statements tend to be a hybrid of the two, start out vision and end in mission. And then it's looking at achievable goals, understanding the direction. And then the SOAR framework, focus on strengths and how do we end up maximizing those strengths. The resource guide we're going to provide to you after this, you guys can edit, you can put your own chamber association name on it. Make it your own. If you want to follow up with us afterwards on how you would guide this through with a committee meeting or a board meeting, or from a staff standpoint, we'll be happy to follow up with you. Just let us know. There's no obligation there, because we really believe about the more that we can make our organizations strong, it benefits our communities and our professional groups that we represent so much in a powerful way. So we're going to go organizationally, and that's where we're going to end today, is looking at organizationally. Start out with self. We're going to look now at organization. Jill, you want to take us into the next area about what possibilities are out there?
I do, because I want us to think about that strength you identified early on, where some of you talked about advocacy and your staffs and other things that you identified as the strength of your organization. You said storytelling, mission-mindedness. We had a lot of advocacy, relationships, consistency, and reliability. So think about that and say, what are the possibilities in those? What in that strength, what does that make you think about as far as possibilities? How could you leverage that strength to use that strength? What's the opportunity that comes from that strength? And I'd love to, again, to open it up and ask and invite you to share of what's a strength that might not be the one you put in the chat box, and that's fine, but what's a strength that you knew was or know as a strength of your organization? Either you did leverage that, or you're thinking now, wow, now that I've heard this, I could leverage that. We'd love to hear from you with some ideas and feedback, or even questions on, like, I think you're full of, what do you mean?
And Jill, even to supplement, and a yes and with this is, now as we're seeing into our communities with expanded business opportunities, that for chambers in particular, what opportunities now do you see for your chambers and associations now? how have things shifted for you? So looking at team talent, collectively the team talent that came into play. But what are those opportunities that you see ahead of you now, even here within the next 30 days or next 60 days, that may not have been present, say, 60 days ago? So, I mean, things are shifting so quickly now. But what possibilities or opportunities do you see now for your chamber or association as you're moving forward here in the next 30 to 60 days? Yeah.
So,
Go ahead, Jill. Sorry.
So Nicole has put in the chat box that they leverage their strong community ties by working with the city government, the chamber, and the downtown groups. We've got Michelle has said use of technology to reach customers that previously were reached in person. COVID. This is great, Chris.
So true.
This is great. COVID's the excuse to walk away from the sacred cows, which is so true. This is, that's an opportunity. That's what a great example of an opportunity, even represented in the situation we have with COVID, that it's a great way to open that door to destroy those cows.
Yeah, the online programming. We were chatting with a group this last week, is that we've had this honeymoon period to do with online and that experience. So what is hybrid? What does that look like moving forward for our online engagement? How is that going to shift how volunteers engaged? Now that they've tasted this virtual environment, would they rather, instead of getting on a plane, would they rather join virtually? And how does that impact our organizations or even to our local communities? This does change how we engage one another, how our organizations are structured in an exciting way. It's just new. It makes us uncomfortable though, because it is different, but it is pushing us to imagine things that we would not have had that chance in the past.
Yeah. The other is that in this year, strengths of the organization, of your staff, your volunteers, your leaders, and even yourself may have become evident as how we responded to COVID, how we responded. So you may see strengths you didn't see before that were actually on your board or within the organization, within your for chambers, your members, your member companies, member businesses, and the community aspect of that. And for our associations, if you represent a certain industry, again, what's going on there and all the changes that we have had to make, and some of them very creative changes. So there may be some strengths that just now are becoming evident. And so that's what we want you to be aware of and be cognizant of and think about as you move forward is, always being just aware of those strengths and what do they say to you? What could happen with those strengths?
So a blind spot that we found doing this, because it sounds like, okay, Steve and Jill, this is really nice. All the strength talk, all these things we're looking at, the bright spots, positivity. We've got threats, we've got weaknesses out there, and we're going to guide you into an area where we found, and we like to use the analogy of a train whistle, because we found when we were doing our research with nonprofits is we wanted to find out what's coming down the track. And as we get ready to go into this next area, it's really looking at an analogy that we found, which is using the train. And Jill's going to share with us in just a moment. I'm going to give you the background, the research from it, where it came from. Is that when we came across SOAR, we knew that it was a different dialogue. It created different energy within organizations. But we found that we are so wired to problem solve that we want to fix things. I mean, we want to get in, we want to jump right into task, into tactic, rather than looking at what that goal is. And so Jill and I went back through and looked at a decade of different SWOT analysis that we had done with other organizations and found that there were 4 broad themes. And this is, if there would be a blind spot, this is a blind spot that we found with the SOAR framework. And this is something that we've created to alleviate that blind spot that we think is within the SOAR framework, because we are so wired to fix things. We're so wired to put out fires within the chamber and association management community. And we found that there were 4 broad areas that were coming down the track when we looked at previous data, and this has continued to hold true even with the SOAR framework, with the data that we've continued to collect, is that there's 4 broad areas, and those 4 broad areas are looking at that cause change, proactive or reactive, is in the areas of virtual and tech. So virtual and technology is one change catalyst. Another one is social or cultural. That would be another area. A third area would be looking at legislative or regulatory. And then the fourth broad area is, gosh, I get advocacy. She just went blank. The fourth area of
social, cultural.
Yeah, social, cultural, tech and virtual,
advocacy, legislative.
Oh my gosh!
And financial.
Oh yeah. God, I can't believe I've lived this. Financial and economic. So we found that these four areas tend to be drivers for change, either proactive or reactive. So these are trains coming down the track, and I'll let Jill describe the analogy. But we've typically found that those four bucket areas are what causes the greatest changes for associations and chambers to operate.
So in identifying that, we believe those are the four big areas. And I bet if I asked you to tell me what change is affecting you in those areas, you could just start rattling off flip chart after flip chart after flip chart. But here's the thing. The train analogy is about not waiting until you're blinded by the train light to start reacting to these things. It's about if you're standing on that railroad track and you start feeling the rumbling of the tracks, you know there's a train coming. You know that if you're standing on the track, that you will have to do what to survive? Move. And you're going to have to take some action. Unfortunately, often organizations know the train's coming, they can feel it, and they know they're going to have to act, but a number of things go through their heads. The train's not here yet. Why worry about it right now? The other is, we've got plenty of time. Let's just give it a little bit longer. The other is, we don't like the train. So a great example of this is technology. And for those of you who've been around for a long time, you'll remember when we first had email and the internet, and some folks had to be dragged kicking and screaming into the internet, right? And I remember speaking to a group of people, it has to have been 20 years ago, and I said, if you don't have a website, no one's going to know how to find you. And they looked at me like I was crazy. But now it's not even a website. It's, can they find you on this? So not liking the train is not a valid reason for not taking action. And the sooner we can take action, which is being proactive, the faster we can avoid being run over by the train. Now, there are some things that come down the track like COVID that we don't hear the rumbling, we don't see the light, we didn't hear the whistle. That thing was in the station and crashing through like that crazy movie Silver Streak. It destroyed the station as soon as it got in. But most change we can anticipate. And so that's why we like to take this approach of what's coming down the track. And you'll find I hope when you do this with your organization, that folks will immediately identify the trains that are already in the station or very, very close. And we have to keep backing them up saying, okay, that's great, but what else? What's way out there? What's out there that might be a change catalyst in a few years? So I see we have Mark. Mark is telling us that we did a 6-month person evaluation with our stakeholders to determine our strategic vision. So they're not waiting on the train. That's great. We like that you're not waiting on that train.
And there's a dialogue right now about even the chamber we were working with last week. It was because they wanted to get together as a hybrid. There's such a desire about wanting to get together and even planning what the future looks like. So they're going to do one day in the park and the next day is going to be virtual. But the important part is folks are now really wanting to plan, that there is hope to plan. They feel like we've got some metrics that we can plan around because we think that there's going to be an end to this very soon or what that looks like. Plan to do that third and fourth quarter. Definitely, I'm seeing that so much now. The dialogue is hitting the third and fourth quarter of the years where we're seeing a lot of capacity, where groups are starting to get together again and looking at that strategic thinking. Groups are now just starting to warm up to that process of thinking about how do we move forward? What does that look like coming down the track? And Jill, I had to laugh because you're telling the story about on the technology. It reminded me back on the association side, and this was 15 or it had to be 20 years ago, where actually probably more than 20 years, because they were talking about handing the fax machine down from year to year. And
President
how
to
many?
president.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, okay, and I think today, do fax machines even really exist much anymore? And it's so true about how technology has shifted. Somebody wanted to fax something to me the other day, and I said, do people still have fax machines? So it is. It looks at technology and how things shift so
But
quickly.
even when you look at social and you look at how we as a people have changed in this year of what we think is important, how we spend our time, how
Yeah.
we value relationship, how we value social gatherings. What will that mean? What does that train look like in the future for your membership, for your members, for their companies and businesses? What does it look like for your community? And as Steve said, we're having a lot of conversations with folks about what is that new meeting train coming down the track? Is that a hybrid model? Is that an face-to-face model? Will we go back to 60,000 people coming to a town for a convention? Or for those of you in chambers, people coming into your town for a convention. So what does that mean? And so that's that looking forward and being proactive. So Steve, we're going to actually let people experience this, right?
Yeah, we're going to go and we're going to set up a short breakout with you all. And not that you have to, we're going to take a look at that 10-minute mark. And it's to have a dialogue. And we're going to be breaking up, creating the breakouts of what's coming down the track that you're seeing right now. So for example, the group last week, they were really looking at new economic development opportunities that they found for themselves. We had another group that's on the association side of looking from a more professional engagement online, that their CEUs and continuing education has never been so high. And what does that look like now, as they used to do, quote, the butts and seat model of how does that now shift to the online environment? And so we're going to ask you all is what proactive measures are you looking to take right now coming down the track? What are you looking that's new to create? And we're going to give you 10 minutes for this discussion. Jill, anything else to kind of set up the breakout and context? Yeah. Do we want to have a spokesperson to come on back?
Yeah, we'd love you to have a spokesperson because we want to talk about this when we come back. But the other is that for some of you, because the way Teams works, you'll remain in this room. So we want you to treat this room like a breakout. If you aren't sent to a breakout room, just treat this room as a breakout. One or both of us will come back into the room. But that's, I just want to assure you, if you're not sent out into a breakout room, this is your breakout room.
And as a reminder, we will be following up with another handout for you all to supplement a working guide that you guys can cut and paste and do whatever you'd like to support your chamber and association. Okay. All right. So we're going to go ahead and get the breakout rooms set on up, and we'll be back here in 10 minutes to do some last wrap-up comments and next steps.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Isabel's setting up the breakout groups right now.
Great.
Again, if you're on the online version of Teams, or if you don't have the latest device capabilities, you will be just in the main room, and you can treat that as a breakout room. But we look forward to talking to everyone right after these breakout rooms. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Please make sure to mute yourselves as you come back into the main session.
Welcome back, everybody. It's great to see you as you join us again, and I hope you had good breakouts. Some of you may not have had time to identify a spokesperson, so if you didn't, we would love you just to volunteer to be that spokesperson. I'm not sure if Steve has joined back into our room, but
I've not joined yet. I'm
you
undercover.
have not joined yet.
I'm not
Okay,
here.
good.
I'm not here. Jill, if I could jump,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
we are going to get a couple of comments, and I do want to jump on in with one of the comments that came up in the breakout that I was in, and maybe that may prompt some of the other thoughts. But great robust dialogue in the breakout I was in. One of the comments that came up too is surveying the members now of what's keeping them up at night. That is not the same. The answer to that may not have been the same as what it was 3 months, 6, 9, even a year ago. But to re-engaging that of, okay, what's keeping your local chamber members up? And the same is applicable to associations within our professionals, within our trades, of what is keeping you up at night right now. And maybe it's even a timeline, a sense of urgency of, this is what's keeping me up at night that I think of for the next 30 days or 90 days. And then what's keeping me up at night for the next 9 to 12 months. And maybe we start putting a timeline to that, because there's a sense of urgency of things that we believe need to happen right now. But what is that thing down the road that is urgent that's keeping us up? What were some other thoughts? Put it in the chat box or come off mute for any folks that happened in your breakout. Or place it in the chat box.
I'll go. Somebody needs to go. This is Chip Schwarzing with the Idaho Falls Chamber of Commerce. In our group, one of the things that we discussed, that brought up and talked about, was the fact that the normal instinct is, as we emerge from this COVID situation, that we're going to want to go back to normal, and recognizing that normal no longer exists. There's a new normal. Businesses have had to change their directions, their focus, and we've changed the way we do operations, and to attempt to go back to normal would be suicide. We need to recognize that we need to move forward with new rules and new guidelines and new directions.
Chip, it's a great point. Thinking of wanting to go, what is going back to normal, and even related to something that came up in the chat box too, for an association of doing the hybrid that was completely virtual now, but now moving forward, we've tasted this virtual experience that our members in our communities and in our associations are going to be probably demanding that option. And so associations and chambers are going to be doing dual meetings now, where we are setting up the duality of that virtual and that tech, that hybrid environment, remote experience, and that person, that face-to-face experience. We were chatting with a group recently where they wanted to bring in that hybrid, where they allowed 20 people actually to come on in for a meeting, but to keep it equitable within that Zoom platform, those 20 people could actually get together and socialize for the meals. But during the meeting time, they went back into their hotel rooms. So everybody was in that Zoom platform, but yet they were able to gather for lunch and dinner for those people that actually wanted to gather in site for that, for that type of dynamic. So we're seeing so many, members are virtually fatigued, and you're right. I completely, we see that. And I think we're going to see that pendulum about wanting to do so much face-to-face. And then mid-year, I think we're going to find kind of that balance in between of how does this look like moving forward? What's going to be that equilibrium that we find as we go from one extreme to the other, that desire to be face-to-face for some of us, of getting back on planes, going to destinations, leading to our local communities. We're going to find that switch back in the middle, most likely. Great comments that came up into the chat boxes, by the way. Thank you for your comments on that. As we get ready, renewals, partly, another great point of looking at of how do our renewals, what does retention look like? What is the big shift in how meetings are set up? Legislative forums, that's another huge one about fly-in days or ledge days, of what that structure is going to look like going forward. So as we get ready to go through and we wrap on up, and we'll open some things up for some Q&A. And as a reminder, this document will be available to you shortly, as well as an additional resource guide that will guide you through the steps, similarly that Jill and I did verbally, that will guide you through a strategic thinking process for your committees and chamber boards. We'll be glad to provide that up to you in that PowerPoint and just rip and tear whatever you want to, what's appropriate. One segment, all segments. We'll be glad to give you a little bit of a coaching session if you have any questions about it too afterwards. As we go into this last part about where we did go today, as a reminder, 6 broad areas as a recap of where we went. Jill, you want to take this? Our first one. Oh, you're on mute right now, Jill, I believe. I don't have audio from you. If not, I'll go ahead and take that and jump back on in. The last 6 here of looking at, we started with self. We last organizationally, but we want to start with self, because if we take care of ourselves, we can take care of others around it. The strength-based mindset of understanding of what do we do well, finding those bright spots. And it's not Pollyanna. It doesn't mean that we don't have weaknesses and threats, but it's reframing it by saying, if we do this well, how do we replicate that in other areas for our chamber or association? The SOAR Framework as an alternative to the SWOT analysis. And in that handout that we're going to provide to you, it does do a side-by-side analysis of what the SWOT analysis does and what the SOAR Framework does. So you can compare the two for the folks that are very data-minded. And we've even put in a bonus sheet of actually where SWOT came from, which is kind of fun to take a look at that. And then looking at strategic leadership, what are those 3 areas about thinking, that actionable, and then also the influencing, those 3 big areas. And it's about maximizing our strengths, and then what change catalysts are coming down the track, the big 4 on the change catalysts of looking at virtual and tech, culture and society, economic and financial, and regulatory and legislative, of looking at those change catalysts that will complement the SOAR framework, that allows for our problem solving folks that really want to engage what's coming down the track from a very tactical standpoint. And the last part, just want to bring it up for any questions that you may have, and if we have no questions or no additional comments, we'll turn it over to Andrew and Isabel for final comments. But we want to ask any questions. I saw in the chat box about the availability online, so I'll allow Andrew and Isabel to handle that question. But questions or thoughts from folks? See if there's any hands that come on up. Okay, I don't see anything come up in the chat box or hands raised over the icon.
No questions.
All right, with that, we are a little ahead of schedule, but that's always good. And I'll turn it over to, before I do that though, Jill, any final comments before we turn it over to Andrew and Isabel?
No, just thanks for having us today. It was a pleasure, and we're excited to be back at Institute when we do Institute again. And I know again we're all in the same boat, looking at how we gather and who lets us gather. But thanks everybody for being here today. You're a great group.
And as we pass it over to Andrew and Isabel, I want to give a big shout out to Andrew and Isabel for all of their help to keep these experiences, even though they're virtual, together, and for us to be able to connect. And so with that, Andrew and Isabel, once again, thank you. And for everybody joining today, I'll turn it back over to y'all.
Well, Steve and Jill, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate this webinar and all these learning opportunities you've helped with people. I learned a lot about the SOAR framework too, and it's encouraging to begin to look to the future and see how we can help our communities and do a lot of this reevaluation in this quarter and the next quarter to help out the communities and see what the landscape's going to look like post-COVID. So I really appreciate your direction for that. I want to thank everyone for joining today. I have really appreciated all of the participation and chat. I want to remind everyone that we do have a couple more webinars in this series. You can find those on the webinars tab of our website. We also have a few more Centennial Challenge coins for sale. You can find that link on our website as well if you'd like to purchase one of those for a donation to our scholarship fund. Steve and Jill, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You bet. Our pleasure. Thank you all.